Elias Ward had always lived quietly on the edge of the frontier town. People knew him as the man who rarely smiled, rarely argued, and rarely asked for anything. He worked his land alone, fixed his fences alone, rode to town for supplies alone. He wasn't unfriendly, he just kept his distance. Some men respected that, others didn't, and a few felt bothered by it, as if every quiet person was somehow judging them. Elias had learned to ignore their whispers long ago, but on one cold evening, trouble came riding toward him before he even knew it. The sun had already dipped behind the hills when he heard the sound of horses approaching fast. He stepped out onto his porch, wiping dust from his hands. 3 men he recognized from town were riding toward his ranch. They were loud, laughing too hard, shouting things he couldn't fully hear yet. Their horses were kicking up dust like a storm behind them. Something wasn't right. Elias felt the same quiet warning rise in his chest that he had felt many times before. Trouble always announced itself with noise. Then he saw the girl. She wasn't riding a horse. She was walking fast, almost stumbling as the men pushed her forward with their laughter echoing behind her. She wore traditional Cheyenne clothing. Simple, practical, handmade with care. Her long, dark hair fell in waves down her back, and her face, even from a distance, showed both fear and strength at the same time. Elias had never seen her before. When they reached his yard, the men jerked their horses to a stop. The girl stopped too, breathing hard. One of the men laughed so loudly, it echoed off the cabin walls. "Evenin', Ward," he shouted in a mocking tone. "Thought you might enjoy some company tonight." Elias's jaw tightened. He hated the way they said it. He hated the fear he saw in the girl's eyes. He stepped down from the porch, standing between her and the mounted men. "What's going on?" he asked calmly. "Oh, nothin'," another man said with a sneer. "Found this little Cheyenne girl wanderin' near the creek. Thought we'd do you a favor and drop her off. You always look so lonely out here." The men snickered. Elias didn't move, but something cold and sharp formed inside his chest. He looked at the girl. She wasn't tied. She wasn't being held. But the men had clearly frightened her. She kept her eyes lowered, her shoulders tight, her hands shaking slightly at her sides. Elias hated that these men felt brave because they outnumbered a scared young woman. "You've had your fun," Elias said quietly. "Leave her be." "Oh, come on," the first man said, leaning forward on his saddle with a grin. "Don't pretend you ain't pleased. A pretty girl dropped right at your door? You should thank us." The other men laughed again, and Elias felt something inside him harden. He stepped past the girl, standing closer to the horses. His voice stayed calm, but there was steel in it now. "You're not welcome on my land," he said, "and she goes wherever she chooses, not where you tell her." The men exchanged glances. None of them liked being told what to do, especially not by someone as quiet as Elias. But they also knew he wasn't afraid of any of them. And deep down, they knew what they were doing was wrong. Their courage faded quickly when someone looked them in the eyes and didn't blink. "Fine," the first man snapped. "She's your problem now, Ward. Do whatever you want with her." Elias's expression didn't change, but inside, anger burned hotter than he could show. They were still trying to provoke him, still trying to get a reaction. But provoking Elias Ward was like trying to set fire to stone. It never worked. "Ride home," he said simply. Something in his tone made the men hesitate. They muttered under their breaths, turned their horses, and rode away. The sound of hooves faded into the distance. Dust settled. Silence returned. Elias turned back to the girl. She stood still, unsure if she was safe or if she needed to run. She didn't look at him right away. She trembled slightly, not from the cold but from the fear she had held inside while those men laughed at her. "You're safe now," Elias said gently. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head slowly. Her voice was soft when she finally spoke. "No. They scared me, but they did not touch me." Elias felt a small breath of relief. He didn't step closer. He didn't reach for her. He kept enough space so she wouldn't feel cornered. "You're free to go anywhere you want," he said. "I won't stop you. My cabin just happens to be close, and you're welcome to rest inside until you decide what to do." She looked at him then. Really looked. Not with fear, but with confusion. She didn't expect kindness. Her dark eyes studied his face, trying to understand who he was. A stranger who stood up to 3 men for her. A cowboy who spoke softly instead of shouting. She didn't know what to think. "My name is Tahani," she said quietly. "I'm Elias," he replied. Tahani glanced toward the open land, stretching into the dark horizon. The wind was rising, carrying the cold bite of the coming night. She had no horse, no supplies, and no idea what direction to take without risking more danger. Even if she was brave, the night could be cruel to someone walking alone. Elias saw her hesitation. "You can stay inside," he said. "Only for the night. No one will bother you here." There, vine, one. Vine, grood. One. Vine, one. Tahani nodded slowly. Inside the cabin, Elias lit a lantern and set it on the table. The warm glow chased away the shadows. Tahani sat carefully on a chair near the wall, watching everything with alert eyes. Elias moved gently around the cabin, trying not to startle her. He warmed some food, simple bread and stew, and placed it in front of her. "You don't have to eat if you don't want to," he said, "but it's here." Tahani hesitated, then finally took a bite. Her hands shook at first, but gradually steadied. She had been hungry for longer than she wanted to admit. Elias sat on the other side of the room, giving her space while he mended a torn piece of leather from his saddle. He didn't stare at her, didn't question her, didn't treat her like someone he owned or controlled. He simply made sure she was safe. After several minutes of silence, Tahani spoke again. "They laughed at me," she whispered. "They thought I was something to throw away, something to use to insult you. Some main, they round to was fi." Elias's hands paused. He felt anger rise again, not at her, but at the cruelty of those men. He didn't trust himself to say much, so he just answered, with a quiet, steady voice. "They were wrong." Tahani looked at him, surprised by the certainty in his tone. She studied him again, searching for any sign of mockery or false kindness. But Elias Ward had nothing false in him. He was simple, honest, and steady like the land itself. "You didn't shout," she said softly. "You didn't frighten me." "I don't want to," he replied. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Elias thought for a moment. He didn't know how to explain that he had seen people hurt enough in life. He had no interest in adding to anyone's suffering. But instead of explaining everything, he said something simple. "Because you didn't deserve the way they treated you." Tahani lowered her gaze again. She hadn't expected anyone to say that tonight. She hadn't expected someone to defend her without wanting something in return. She hadn't expected safety. The wind outside grew stronger, rattling the windows. The cabin creaked. But inside, the fire glowed steady and warm. Tahani felt her shoulders slowly relax. For the first time that day, she wasn't afraid. Elias stood and grabbed a spare blanket from a shelf. He placed it near the second bed, separate from his own. "You can sleep here," he said. "I'll keep the lantern low." Tahani hesitated again, but then she nodded. She lay down slowly, pulling the blanket close. The long day, the fear, the cold, all of it drained her strength. Her eyes grew heavy. Before she drifted to sleep, she whispered, "Thank you, Elias." He didn't answer immediately. He looked at her, realizing how deeply those simple words reached him. Finally, he replied, with a quiet sincerity she could feel, even with her eyes closed. "You're safe here. I promise. Outside, The night wind howled across the plains. But inside Elias's small cabin, there was unexpected calm. A fragile peace formed between two strangers, brought together by cruelty, but held together by something much stronger. Part 2 began with a quiet dawn spreading across the plains. Pale light slipped through the small cabin window and touched Tahani's face softly. She woke slowly, confused for a moment, unsure of where she was. Then she saw the wooden beams above her, the little lantern still glowing faintly, and the quiet figure of Elias sitting near the table, sipping coffee with calm patience. He wasn't watching her. He wasn't hovering. He simply existed in that quiet, steady way that made her feel safe in a world that had given her very little kindness lately. Elias noticed movement and turned slightly. Tahani sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. "I did not think I would sleep at all," she admitted. "But I did." "That's good," Elias replied. "You needed rest." There was no pressure in his voice, no judgment. He didn't act like she owed him something for the food or the shelter. He simply spoke, as if it were natural to offer safety to someone in trouble. That was something Tahani wasn't used to. Most strangers offered help with hidden intentions, but Elias Ward did not hide anything. His quiet nature was open in its own way. He stood and poured warm water into a tin cup. "There's some stew left," he said, "and bread." Tahani nodded and quietly took the cup. As she sipped, she looked at him closely. He had strong hands, hands that had seen work and hardship. His jaw was rough, with a bit of stubble. His eyes were calm, but she could still see the memory of deep anger he held back the night before. Not anger toward her, anger for her. That was new. Someone had actually felt angry for her sake. After a moment, Elias spoke again. "If you'd like, I can ride with you today. You said you were looking for someone." Tahani's fingers tightened around the cup. "My younger brother," she said quietly. "He is small. He wanders too far sometimes. I fear he may have gotten lost, or worse, crossed paths with those same men." Elias nodded slowly. "Then we'll start looking. We'll check the creek, the trading paths, and anywhere he might go." Tahani met his eyes. "You would do that for me?" "For him," Elias said. "And for you." Something warm flickered in her chest. She didn't show it, but she felt it. She helped clean up the cabin, even though Elias said she didn't have to. It felt like a way to thank him. And, when they stepped outside, the air carried a cold bite. But the rising sun softened the world with golden light. The horses in the corral snorted and stamped their hooves. Elias saddled his horse with practiced hands. Then, he paused, looking at Tahani. "Can you ride?" Tahani lifted her chin slightly. "I can ride as well as any man," she said with quiet pride. Elias smiled, just a small one, but real. "Good." He brought one of his calmer horses forward, a brown mare with gentle eyes. Tahani placed her hand on the animal's neck, whispering something softly in her own language. The horse seemed to relax even more under her touch. Elias watched with quiet admiration. Most people in town didn't know how to be gentle with animals. They only knew control. But Tahani's way was different, respectful, calm, natural. They rode side by side as the sun rose higher. The land stretched around them, wide and open. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It felt peaceful. But after a while, Elias spoke. "I saw bruises on your foot last night," he said softly. "From walking. You must have been searching for your brother a long time." Tahani looked down. "I did not stop," she said. "I thought I would find him before night came. But then those men..." Her voice faltered. Elias didn't push her to continue. Instead, he said, "They shouldn't have treated you that way. And they shouldn't treat anyone that way." Tahani looked at him with a thoughtful expression. "Why did you speak up for me?" she asked. You were outnumbered. Those men are not your friends. Elias shrugged. It was the right thing to do. Many people do not do the right thing. She replied softly. I know, he said. They rode toward the creek first. There were tracks in the mud, some from deer, some from men, some too small to tell. Tahani got off her horse and knelt, running her fingers along the ground. Her eyes were sharp, focused. He was here, she whispered. These are his footprints. Elias crouched beside her but didn't interrupt her thinking. Tahani followed the tracks a little farther, then pointed toward the wind-swept grasslands. He went this way. Elias mounted again. Then we will too. They followed the faint trail across the land. Hours passed. The sun grew warm. The wind quieted, and the horses' steady steps made a rhythm that matched their breathing. Elias occasionally glanced at Tahani. She rode with quiet strength, scanning the land like someone who understood every inch of it. Despite all she had faced, she carried herself with dignity. He respected that more than he could say. As they continued, Tahani noticed a bruise on Elias's forearm when he reached for his saddlebag. You are hurt, she said suddenly. Elias looked down. How did it happen? He hesitated, then said, A few days ago, a child in town fell ill. Her father was drunk and shouting. He tried to keep people away, even though she needed help. I got between them, and he didn't like that. Tahani stared at him with a slow, growing understanding. So, you take beatings for children, and you protect strangers, without reason. It's not something I think about, Elias said quietly. I just do what feels right. Tahani's gaze softened. She had seen many kinds of men. Proud men, angry men, greedy men. But a man who helped without reward, who stood alone, without asking for a witness, that was rare. They stopped at midday near a cluster of rocks. Elias handed her a small piece of bread and dried meat. As they ate, Tahani finally spoke again. They pushed me toward you last night, she said softly. They laughed, like it was a joke. They tried to make me feel less, and they tried to insult you by using me. Elias's jaw tightened. They're fools, he said. They don't understand strength or respect. Tahani looked at him carefully. You did not look at me like they did. I never will, Elias replied, his voice simple and true. Her heart beat a little faster, though she didn't show it openly. Something about his honesty reached deep inside her, warming a place she had thought was frozen after days of fear and searching. They rode again in the afternoon, following the small footprints until the trail grew clearer. Then Tahani spotted something near an old, abandoned hunting shelter, a piece of cloth caught on a bush. It was her brother's. Elias watched her face change, hope lighting her features. He's close, she whispered. Before they could reach the shelter, she suddenly stopped her horse and motioned for Elias to be quiet. Voices drifted on the wind, rough, careless voices. Elias recognized them instantly. The same men from last night. Tahani's eyes darkened. Not with fear this time, but with protective fire. Elias dismounted quietly, motioning her to stay back. He didn't want her to risk danger. Not after all she had been through. But Tahani refused to hide behind him completely. She stayed close, ready to help. They approached carefully, listening. The men were arguing among themselves. One of them complained that keeping the little boy around wasn't worth the trouble. Another said they should let him go before they got in real trouble. Elias felt something rise in him, anger, sharp and steady. Not loud, not wild, controlled, dangerous. Tahani placed her hand lightly on his arm. Please don't be reckless, she whispered. But please, bring him back. Elias nodded once. He stepped out from behind the rocks. Let the boy go. The men jerked around in surprise. You again? Elias didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Perhaps it was the calmness in his tone. Perhaps it was the way he stood unmoving, unafraid. Or perhaps even men who caused trouble understood somewhere deep down that harming a child was a line they should not cross. Whatever the reason, the men hesitated. Their false courage crumbled quickly under the weight of real responsibility. Finally, one of them shrugged. "Fine, take him." Tahani's younger brother ran into her arms. She lifted him, holding him tightly. Tears filled her eyes, but her face lifted with relief and strength. Elias watched the moment quietly, letting them have their reunion. When the men rode off, Elias let out a long breath. Tahani turned toward him, holding her brother close. The gratitude in her eyes was deep and powerful. "You saved him," she whispered. "He's safe," Elias said simply. "But you made him safe," she replied. There was no dramatic wind, no shining sun at that moment, just the simple truth of her words settling between them. Elias felt his heartbeat shift, just slightly, but enough that he knew something in him had changed. As the sun lowered and they rode back together, Tahani looked at him and said softly, "You are the only man who has treated me like a human in many days." Her words hit him harder than any blow he had taken in his life. He felt heat rise in his chest. A warm, steady fire. He didn't understand yet. He looked away, pretending to adjust the reins. But inside, her words echoed again and again. When they reached camp, her brother asleep against her shoulder, Tahani looked at Elias with a calm, deep expression. "Tomorrow," she said gently, "I will tell you something important." Elias didn't ask what it was. He simply nodded. But as he watched her walk away with her brother safe in her arms, he knew one thing for certain. Whatever she said next would not leave him the same man. The next morning, the camp was still quiet when Elias stepped outside his cabin. The sun had not fully risen yet, but the sky was painted with soft colors: blue, violet, and the faintest touch of gold. Elias breathed in the cold morning air. It felt clean, steady, and strangely full of expectation. Tahani had told him she would speak with him today. He didn't know what she wanted to say, but the tone in her voice yesterday stayed with him like a quiet fire burning low in his chest. He saddled his horse slowly, giving himself time to think. Tahani and her brother were staying in a small, safe place near the camp, close enough for him to reach within an hour's ride. He planned to go check on them, to see if they needed supplies or help. But part of him also wanted to go, simply because being near Tahani made the world feel calmer. There was something about her presence, something strong and warm that reached him in a way he couldn't explain. By the time he reached the open plains, the sun had risen. The wind was soft, carrying the smell of grass and earth. Elias rode silently, his thoughts drifting without direction. He wasn't used to thinking about other people this much. His life had always been simple: work, quiet, and survival. Now, he found himself thinking about a young woman he barely knew, yet somehow understood more deeply than he expected. When he arrived near the shelter where Tahani and her brother had rested, he slowed his horse. He didn't want to startle them. Tahani was already outside, kneeling by a small fire as she warmed food for her brother. She looked up when she heard Elias's horse. Her eyes softened with recognition. "You came." "I said I would," Elias replied. Tahani stood, brushing dust from her hands. Her brother, still half asleep, sat wrapped in a blanket near the fire. Elias walked closer and crouched to check the boy's foot, which had been scraped during his wandering. The injury looked better. Tahani watched how gently Elias touched the boy's leg, how careful he was not to cause pain. "You have a soft hand," she said. "I try to," Elias replied. "Children have enough to fear without men adding to it." Tahani sat beside her brother, watching Elias as he moved quietly around the camp. She seemed deep in thought. After a long silence, she finally spoke. "There is something I must tell you today." Elias didn't look up right away. He was preparing more wood for the fire, but her voice made him stop. He waited, giving her space to find her words. Tahani took a slow breath. "Yesterday, you saved my brother, even though you did not have to. And before that, you protected me, even though you owed me nothing." Elias shook his head. "No one should be treated the way those men treated you. And yet many people looked away," Tahani replied softly. "Only you stepped forward." Elias didn't know what to say to that. He wasn't a man who did things for praise. He simply reacted when he saw wrong. Tahani continued. "I want you to understand something," she said. "In my culture, when someone protects another at great risk, when someone offers help without asking anything in return, we do not forget it. It means something. It is not a small act. It is important." Elias met her gaze. Her eyes were calm, steady, almost glowing with sincerity. "That is why I needed to speak with you," she said. Elias nodded once. "I'm listening." Tahani looked at her brother, who had leaned against her shoulder. She gently brushed his hair, then looked back at Elias. "My people have seen many hard things," she said. "We have seen land taken, families separated, dangerous roads, and cold nights. Kindness is rare. True kindness is even rarer. When you stood before those men, it was more than kindness. It was strength, the kind that protects, not destroys." Elias swallowed. Her words stirred something deep in him, something he didn't have a name for. "In my tribe," she continued, "when someone like you helps someone like me, we say they have a good heart, one that is alive, one that the Great Spirit sees. It is not something small." Elias felt heat rise in his chest again. He looked away briefly, unsure how to handle her sincerity. He had never been praised like this. Not by anyone. Not ever. Tahani saw his discomfort, but she also saw the truth beneath it. Elias was not embarrassed by her words. He simply wasn't used to receiving them. She reached out and touched his hand lightly. The touch was gentle. Not forward or bold. It was a touch of gratitude, of connection. Elias's breath caught quietly, not because of the touch itself, but because of what it meant. "You deserve to know," she said softly. "You have changed something in my heart." Elias finally found his voice again. "I didn't mean to." "I know," Tahani said with a small smile. "Good people never mean to. Their actions speak for them." Elias stared at her for a long moment. The fire crackled softly. The wind whispered through the grass. And Tahani's brother slept on peacefully. Elias felt the world slow around them, settling into something quiet and warm. "I want to help you find your family," Elias said. "If there are others." Tahani shook her head gently. "My family is small now. My brother and I. Most others are far away, or gone." Elias's heart tightened. "I'm sorry." "It is life," she replied, her voice calm, but carrying deep truth. "We carry our pain, but we keep walking." Elias nodded. "You're strong." Tahani smiled faintly. "I had to be." Her smile faded slowly as she looked at Elias again. "But strength does not mean I do not feel fear. And yesterday, when I feared I would not find my brother, I felt alone. Truly alone." She paused, her voice dropping to a whisper. "But then you came." Elias lowered his head slightly. Something inside him tightened, not with pain, but with a realization. He didn't speak, but Tahani could see the change in his eyes. They decided to ride farther that day, just to be sure no one else was roaming the area or causing trouble. Tahani placed her brother carefully on the horse with her. Elias rode beside them, keeping his eyes sharp, his posture alert. The land stretched wide around them, golden under the sunlight. Birds flew overhead. A herd of bison grazed far in the distance. Tahani watched Elias as he observed everything with quiet awareness. She admired how he didn't speak much, but every action showed who he was. When they reached a ridge overlooking the valley, Tahani stopped her horse. "This is where I wanted to bring you," she said. Elias dismounted, helping her brother down gently. Tahani stepped to the edge of the ridge. "This place is sacred," she said softly. "A place of meaning. When we find clarity, we come here. When we must speak truth, we come here." Elias looked around. The land was breathtaking, wide, silent, filled with soft waves of tall grass dancing in the wind. Tahani turned to him. "Yesterday, when you saved my brother, something changed inside me. I cannot ignore it." Elias's heartbeat grew louder in his ears. "Tahani." She stepped closer. "You must understand. I do not offer my trust easily." Elias felt words pressing against his throat, but none came out. "You treated me with respect," she said. "You protected me without expecting anything. You cared for my brother as if he mattered to you." "He does," Elias said softly. Tahani's eyes softened even more. She reached out again, touching his hand gently. This time, Elias didn't look away. He didn't pretend it meant nothing. He felt the truth of it settle deeply into him. "There is something else," Tahani whispered. "Something I did not say before." Elias waited. "When those men pushed me toward your ranch," she said, "they wanted to humiliate you. But instead, you showed me what a real man is." Elias's breath stilled. "And yesterday," she continued, "watching you stand in front of them again, something inside me felt warm, strong, alive. I do not know what it means yet, but I know it was real." Elias finally found his voice. "Tahani, I don't want to cause trouble for you or your brother." "You are not trouble," she said. "You are the opposite." Elias didn't know what to do with the feeling rising inside him. It was not love too new, too fragile for such a word. It was not desire too pure and too respectful. It was something else. Something steady and warm. Something rare. A quiet bond. A beginning. Tahani stepped even closer, the wind lifting strands of her hair. She looked into his eyes and said softly, "I will tell my people what you did. They will know you are a man of honor, and I want you to come with me tomorrow. I want them to meet the man who saved my brother and saved me from fear." Elias felt something heavy lift from his chest. "If that's what you want, I'll come." Tahani smiled, small, genuine, beautiful. "It is what I want." As the sun began to lower and they rode back toward camp, Tahani glanced at Elias with a warmth that reached him deeper than any words ever had. He did not say it aloud, but he knew. Whatever happened next would change both their paths forever. The next morning arrived with a soft, warm breeze, carrying the smell of grass and distant rain. Elias woke before the sun, as he always did. But this time, when he stepped outside his cabin, he felt something different inside him, something like a steady flame burning low and warm in his chest. Today, he would meet Tahani's people. Today, he would stand beside her, not as a rescuer or a stranger, but as someone she trusted. The thought made him unusually nervous, though he tried not to show it. He checked his horse carefully, smoothing the blanket, tightening the saddle, making sure everything was perfect. It wasn't the meeting itself that worried him. It was the thought of what this moment meant. Tahani had invited him for a reason. She had spoken from her heart yesterday, and Elias felt the weight of her words more strongly this morning. Her gratitude, her trust, her calm closeness, all of it had settled deep inside him. By the time he reached the area where Tahani was staying, The sun was rising, painting the sky with colors of gold and pink. Tahani stood near her horse, adjusting a small blanket around her brother's shoulders. When she saw Elias approaching, her expression softened the way it always did when she recognized him. "You are early," she said with a quiet smile. "I didn't want to keep you waiting," Elias replied. Her brother looked up sleepily, from the blanket wrapped around him. When he saw Elias, his face brightened in a shy, grateful way. The boy said nothing, but the relief in his eyes said everything. Elias gave him a small nod. Tahani finished preparing the horses. She moved with calm confidence, her hands practiced and gentle. Elias noticed how carefully she tied the ropes, how she checked the hooves, and how she spoke softly to her horse in her own language. Everything she did had intention, meaning, and respect. It made Elias admire her even more. When they were ready, Tahani looked at him. "Are you sure you want to come with us?" she asked softly. "I said I would," he answered. She nodded, though her eyes searched his face for another moment. There was something almost shy in her gaze, something hopeful and unsure at the same time. "Then we go," she said. They rode across the plains together, her brother riding with her. The morning wind lifted strands of Tahani's hair as she guided her horse with effortless skill. Elias rode slightly behind, watching the land and making sure nothing threatened them. He was quiet, but Tahani felt his presence as strongly as the warm sun on her shoulders. As they approached the Cheyenne camp, Elias felt the weight of the moment settle on him. Tents stood in a wide circle, smoke rising from a few fires. Children played near the edges. Women prepared food, and men worked on tools or checked their horses. The camp was alive with activity. But when people noticed Tahani returning, many paused to watch. She straightened her posture as they neared the edge of the camp. Elias could see that the closer they came, the more serious she became. This was her world, her people, and bringing a cowboy into the center of it was no small thing. When they dismounted, Tahani's brother ran ahead, and several women rushed to meet him, checking that he was unharmed. Their relief was clear as they hugged him tightly. Then their eyes moved to Tahani, then to Elias. A few men approached, their expressions guarded but not hostile. One of them stepped forward, older than the rest, with lines of leadership and wisdom drawn into his face. He looked at Tahani first. "You are safe," he said, his voice steady. "Yes," she replied, "because of him." She placed a hand on her brother's shoulder and gently guided him toward Elias. The camp fell silent, waiting for an explanation. Elias stood tall but calm, knowing this moment mattered deeply. Tahani spoke clearly, her voice carrying across the quiet space. "He saved my brother when others put him in danger," she said. "He stood against men who wished harm. He protected us without asking anything. He is a man of honor." Murmurs traveled through the camp. The older man studied Elias carefully, his eyes sharp, weighing every detail: the calm posture, the quiet strength, the way Tahani stood near him with trust written plainly across her face. "You risked yourself for them?" the older man asked. "Yes," Elias said. "Anyone would have." Tahani shook her head gently. "Not anyone. Many saw us in danger. Only he came." The older man nodded slowly. Then he turned to Tahani. "Why did you bring him here?" Tahani took a small breath, steadying herself. Then she looked at Elias, and something warm and deep moved through her eyes. "Because he deserves to be thanked," she said. "And because his presence is important to me." Elias felt something shift in his chest, not shock, not embarrassment, but a quiet, powerful stirring that reached deeper than anything he had felt in years. The older man nodded again, this time with understanding. "Then, he is welcome here." Some people looked surprised. Others nodded respectfully. The camp slowly returned to its rhythm, but dozens of eyes still followed them with quiet curiosity. Tahani led Elias to a shaded area where she prepared a small meal for him. Her brother sat beside her, smiling, shyly, at Elias. The boy pointed at Elias's horse, then at Elias's hat, then at the sky, as if trying to tell a story. Tahani translated softly. "He says you look like someone from the stories," she said. "What kind of stories?" Elias asked lightly. "The ones where a man stands alone against storms," Tahani replied with a gentle smile. "The ones where courage is quiet, not loud." Elias felt heat rise in his face, and Tahani's smile deepened at the sight. She found his shyness endearing, more telling than any words he could say. When they finished eating, Tahani asked him to walk with her. They walked past the edge of the camp to a quiet place, where tall grass moved gently in the wind. The sky stretched endlessly above them. "I wanted to bring you here," she said softly. "Away from eyes and noise. There is something more I want to tell you." Elias felt his heart beat heavier. He nodded. Tahani looked at the ground for a moment, gathering strength. Then she lifted her chin and met his eyes. "When I first came to the town," she began, "I feared everyone. I had been searching for my brother for days. I had seen cruelty and mockery. I felt alone. And when those men pushed me toward your land, I thought more cruelty would follow." Elias's jaw tightened. "They shouldn't have." But instead, Tahani interrupted gently. Elias swallowed hard, unable to speak. "You looked at me without fear, without judgment, without cruelty. You spoke softly. You protected me. You protected my brother. And you kept your distance until I felt safe." Her voice grew even softer. "That kind of man is rare." Elias felt something warm spread through his chest, something he had tried to ignore. Something he could no longer pretend wasn't there. Tahani stepped closer, close enough for him to feel her warmth in the breeze. "In my heart," she said, "I feel something growing. I do not know its full shape yet, but I know it is real. And I know it came from the way you cared." Elias finally found his voice, low and rough with emotion. "Tahani, I'm not sure what I can offer. My life is simple, quiet, lonely sometimes. I don't know if you offer safety," she said gently, "and truth, and a heart that rises for others. That is more than most men offer." He looked down, overwhelmed. Tahani reached out and touched his hand lightly, the same gentle touch she had given him before. But this time, with more meaning behind it. "I wanted you to hear these words," she whispered, "because truth should never be hidden." Elias lifted his gaze slowly, meeting her eyes fully. In them, he saw honesty, warmth, and a quiet strength that matched his own. Without thinking, he stepped closer just enough to show he wasn't afraid of this bond forming between them. Tahani didn't step back. She stood still, steady, trusting. The wind moved softly around them, lifting her hair and brushing it across his hand. Neither of them spoke for a long moment, but everything that needed to be said already hung in the air between them like a gentle sunrise. Finally, Tahani broke the silence. "You can visit this place whenever you wish," she said. Elias nodded slowly. "I'll come," he said. Her smile was small, warm, and full of quiet truth. They walked back toward the camp side by side, not holding hands, not acting like anything had been decided, but carrying a bond that was real, honest, and growing stronger with every step. Later, when Elias rode back toward his own land, he realized something clearly. The cruel joke that was meant to shame him had instead brought him someone who saw him for who he truly was. And the words she spoke today didn't just warm his blood or his heart. They changed the direction of his life forever.